Hey everybody, let's dive in. We're going to make a super saw type lead. You've heard this a ton of times in EDM. You've heard it all the way back into euphoric trance type tracks back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's just a classic sound. We're going to use Ableton just because that's my favorite workstation. You can use what you use, but Ableton's a good one. And we're going to use the soft synth Spire by Reveal Sound. Great soft synth, really well loved by EDM producers right now for a lot of reasons, not least of which is that when you go into the factory sound bank, there are a ton of super usable sounds. I referenced that Blaster Jack's Hardwell tune in my article here, and it's kind of crazy. When you pull up preset number 38, X lead, it sounds familiar. Not bad for off the shelf. So great, but we're not here to dive through presets. We're here to build a patch from the ground up to really understand it. So let's do that. Let's hit init to initialize the patch, and let's rock. Now we've got an initialized patch. We've got our MIDI notes down here, 3-part harmony with the lead on the top. Let's take a listen. Not terribly interesting unless you're into the whole chip tune thing. But we want to do something a little bit different. So we're going to build the patch. We're going to start with oscillator 1. Here's our oscillator bank. And I'm a big believer in getting as much out of as little as you can. So we're going to see how much of the just core of this sound we can get really just by building off of oscillator 1. So right now we've got a pretty classic saw wave going on. And I don't really want to mess with the real character of the oscillator at all. I think that's a really good place to start. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to move the fine tuning up a bit. Let's bring it up to 9 cents. What that's going to do when we add the other oscillators into the mix is it'll be slightly out of tune with them, but not so much that it'll sound bad, just so much that it kind of will give you this pulsating, this width that adds to the overall dimension of everything. On its own, it doesn't do anything, but you'll hear it when we bring in the other oscillators. Now, the next big part is unison. Unison is a huge part of this sound. Here we are with really no unison. And now here's 9 voices of unison. I mean, wow, totally night and day. So we're going to crank the density up here. In Spire, that is going to group the 9 unison voices that are playing at once in such a way that it really emulates the super saw synths of yesteryear. And we're also going to go to this cool section that is unique to Spire. It's simple. It's width. Okay, so here we are before width. And here we are after width. Oh, I love it. Let's just leave it dimed. It just makes it sound huge, wide, fat, and that's a great start for this sound. All right, so the next stop in crafting this sound is to go to the filter section. The filter determines the frequency content of a sound. Right now it's off, so everything comes through. But I'm going to turn it to perfecto and a low pass 4-pole filter, LP4, and you're going to hear how different it sounds. So what you're hearing is after the note hits, just a moment after, this filter is closing and stripping away the high frequency content based on this shape down here. This is the filter envelope. We can change the shape of that envelope, which in turn changes how long it takes for the high frequencies to get stripped out of there. So, and I want to bring the decay down just a bit to make this really percussive in general. That gives us a pretty good foundation for what we want. It's worth noting, too, I chose perfecto just because there are different characters you can give to the filters. Each of these different characters has a low pass, band pass, high pass filter to it. But perfecto, I think, alludes to a trance label of old and is just a great sound, unique to Spire, that really invokes some of that good old sound. So, all right, so we're getting somewhere. Okay, so that percussive effect might be a little more pronounced than I want for this purpose. So I'm going to bring the envelope amount. That's the amount that this shape is applied to the filter brought it down so it's not quite as abrupt and intense. So now I'm going to do a quick thing here and skip to dessert for a moment. Because if you're like me, one of the things that set you off about electronic music was that sound of a great synth patch and the filter opening and closing over time. I'll show you what I mean. We're going to go to the modulation matrix here, and we're basically going to take one of these mod knobs, and we are going to route this to, here I'm going to grab mod 1, and I'm going to route it to the filter cutoff. Just a touch here. So I'm going to crank this up and hit play. Doesn't sound much different. I'm going to crank it up just enough so that when this is dimed, the filter is all the way open all the time. All right, very cool. So now when I hit play and I mess with this mod knob, all right, that's great. We're getting somewhere. Let's keep moving along. Let's close the mod matrix. All right, so far we've dialed in the oscillator, the unison, the width, the filter, and a bit of the filter envelope. Now I'm going to skip over here to the envelope for the oscillator. This really determines the volume of the sound over time. Right now you see the sustain is all the way up, the release is all the way down. See how it cuts off really fast at the end? I'm going to bring the release up a bit to make it a little more natural sounding. That's better. So I want to add a little bit of a spike of percussiveness to the beginning of the sound. And what I'm going to do is actually route a second envelope here, envelope 4, which isn't being used for anything yet. I'm going to route that also to the filter cutoff. Turn up the amount a bit, turn down the sustain, and I'm just going to give it decay. So basically, all I'm giving it is almost a transient peak to make it sound almost more like marimba-like, like a hard impact. You'll hear it as I bring this in. Pretty cool. Now I'm going to go to the EQ section here. I'm going to engage the EQ. I'm going to boost the lows a little bit. I'm going to boost the highs a little bit. And I'm going to drop the mids a little bit. Just kind of a generic smiley face EQ that's going to give it a little bit of hi-fi-ness. Here it is with EQ. Here it is without. Really jumps out at you, doesn't it? I'm going to bring this envelope down just a smidge, actually. Cool. So now we're going to move on a bit, and I want some impact to this. A little bit of low end. Right now, it's maybe not as strong as I might like it. So I'm going to engage oscillator 2, bring it up just a little bit. Maybe up to here. And oscillator 2, we're going to bring this bad boy down exactly 1 octave. So if you were to solo oscillator 2, it would sound like this. All right, but when you bring it into the mix, awesome. That's exactly what I want. And I also want some shimmer. So let's bring in oscillator 3 a bit. And I'm actually going to bring that up an octave. And I'm going to detune that so we get a little more of that width we were talking about. So if I solo oscillator 3, bring in oscillator 2, bring in oscillator 1. Yeah. And then for a little bit of icing on the cake, why don't we just go over here to the effects section and throw on a little bit of delay. Not bad for a couple of minutes work. So that's a pretty standard super saw type lead. I also like to often add maybe a little bit of noise on a noise oscillator here to give it a little more grit when you open it all the way up, maybe a little distortion. But this is a great place to start for this kind of sound. Let's hear the whole sequence real briefly. Hopefully, this was useful to you. Go forth and program.